We work hard as physicians to take care of the health and well-being of our patients. But when it comes to our money, do we have the same condition of care? Probably not. Let's change that together. Welcome to the Financial Freedom for Physicians podcast, where we'll fight and advocate for your financial literacy. As always, I'm your host, Dr. Christopher Liu. Thanks for being here. Let's jump into the show. Hey guys, I want to welcome you guys to the Financial Freedom for Physicians podcast. We've got a great episode this week. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button as well as the notifications bell, and be sure to like, comment, and share if you like this episode. And we'll get into this week's sponsor and show. This week's episode is sponsored by CitiVest. CitiVest has quickly become the most popular and best way for doctors to invest in top-performing real estate private equity funds that are usually reserved for institutional investors. This unique access to investing in these institutional funds is available for the first time ever through CitiVest's easy and secure online investment platform. CitiVest does the hard work of conducting due diligence and vetting the investments. They even get a third-party due diligence report that is posted on their website. As a result of aggregating a several million-dollar investment amount into their access funds, CitiVest gains access to investing in the institutional investment and is able to negotiate better investment terms such as a 12% preferred return. You can check them out at citivest.com or go to the link in the show notes below. Now on to the show. Welcome everybody to this week's podcast episode for the Financial Freedom for Physicians podcast. And I'm your host, Dr. Christopher Liu. And we have this weekly podcast where I bring in guests, physicians, entrepreneurs, investors that are doing things on the cutting edge, moving the needle and impacting the field of medicine. So today we have a physician we got introduced through mutual contacts, Dr. Cheng Ron, and he goes by Cheng. And he's a physician entrepreneur specializing in lifestyle medicine, integrative practice. So it'll be a wonderful discussion about how he got started, entrepreneurship, wellness. And so, Cheng, welcome.
Thanks so much, Chris. Really love having you interview me. I'm usually the one doing the interviewing, so this is a nice change for yeah.
Yeah, I know it was interesting. We were talking backstage and we got acquainted through Dr. Brent Lacey, and you know, you're based out of Houston. I'm based out of Houston. So tell us more about your journey, how you got started, how you got doing what you're doing today.
Yeah, no problem. I started my medical journey with the integrative background. So my mom does acupuncture and herbs and Chinese medicine. She's really well known in Houston. And then my dad, he's on the scientific side. He's an MD, PhD. He's currently one of the deans at the University of Houston Pharmacy School in tech and biological development. So, you know, I kind of grew up at the dinner table talking about different things. And even my first publication, I was such a big nerd. I still am. When I was 16, is talking about the effects of herbs on dysmenorrhea and chronic pain receptors, et cetera, et cetera. So as I went through training in school, I really wanted to focus on like integrating sort of the Eastern Western principles and philosophies, right? And so being sort of the ADD type of entrepreneur that I am, I created a lot of structures for myself so that I'm able to do so. And then out came Texas Center for Lifestyle Medicine in 2017, where I really wanted to focus on bringing more of the integrative health type services to the insured population, Medicare, Medicaid, et cetera, et cetera. And also 2022 started a program to teach other docs how to do it and really want to scale this. And that's why I'm on the show.
Awesome. That's so wonderful. Yeah, my mom and dad were scientists too. So, you know, we grew up around the dinner table,
Nice.
you know, talking academics and the medicine.
Yeah.
So
Awesome.
But yeah, that's awesome. So you So tell us what made you focus. Why did you decide wellness and lifestyle? Was it something you saw, an experience, an encounter?
I think the biggest misconception that I do is actually wellness. I actually don't let my staff use the W word. We don't use the word wellness, and part of it is the messaging. So early in 2014, I actually started a digital media company for physicians and actually exited and sold that. And part of the message, part of the things that I learned really about messaging, very strategic messaging, is sort of the understanding of the concept of labeling. And so one of the things I wanted to get away was what wellness is in the actual United States, which belongs in a bit of a different category. So we use the word collaborative, and there's a reason for that. So the word collaborative means a lot of different things. We like to collaborate with the patients. We collaborate with the other doctors on the outside. We collaborate with the insurance companies, and we collaborate with their family members. It's a four-way collaborative system. And so, unfortunately, in the health and wellness space, there's not a whole lot of collaboration. And there's actually a lot of physicians and physician bashing, which you kind of see on the internet all the time, which is not what I'm really fond of, right? And so the concept of collaborative medicine is that we don't stop at finding solutions for your health. So we end up with some really complex physiologies, really complex disorders, diseases, so much so that we got featured on the North American Rare Diseases Association site. And then we are all getting all these sort of connective tissue disorders and stuff like that. And it naturally became that way because the actual primary focus is on collaboration. And so the way that I even developed the business plan behind it is because I was really following what regulatory statements were doing at the federal level and reimbursement and CPT structure. So 2017, where the practice started, was the first time we actually had CPT codes that reimburse for collaboration. And I bet most people don't even know about this. For example, if I'm speaking to a patient's doctor or my staff there's an interprofessional CPT code that can be billed by both sides. And so I started, really focusing on, hey, I'm gonna spend half my week just talking to other patients' doctors and the collaboration process. And so obviously that actually generates a lot of revenue, believe it or not, is the actual collaboration effort. And so I'm like, you know what, there's really something to this. And then making a business plan based on the reimbursement structures allows us to really focus and tune in on what patients are really saying and the messages. And I think that created this new sense of core values is that in all medicine, doesn't matter if it's in the US or abroad, in all medicine, there is a serious lack of interprofessional discussion, right? And so it's sort of the idea that, hey, let's move on to the next patient. Let's kind of forget about this. Whereas, for us, it's like, hey, let's put this aside and let's have a collaborative discussion between the physicians, the dentists, the chiropractors, the acupuncturists, their physicians at Mayo Clinic, whatever, right? So we ended up seeing a lot of like interstate patients, international patients, Dubai, Kazakhstan, Germany. And it kind of turned into this like sort of this monstrous beast that was a little hard to control. and from an entrepreneur standpoint, we're like, well, how the heck am I going to make this more scalable? And I realized that doctors really need to understand that there's a way to redesign healthcare, and it's not going to be the politicians. It's not going to be administrators that's doing it. It's going to be the doctors that are going to be taking control to change what healthcare is supposed to be.
That's awesome. So you mentioned a lot of things such as scalability, and you work with insurance entities. Right. Tell us some of the problems not problems, but more of the barriers, working with in these entities and scaling up the company.
Yeah, problems / barriers / challenges. In my company, I make everyone know that these are just challenges. These aren't problems, right? Mm-hmm. And so let me tell you the biggest problem. The biggest problem is that the current model of medicine is not scalable, right? Think about it. Like, a doctor starts his or her own practice. Maybe it's a solo practice, and after 30 years, retires and then wants to sell the practice. Well, what asset do you really have to sell within the practice? Because the talent is going away. The talent is retiring. And so you have a lot of large corporations scooping up these doctors that are retiring, especially during the pandemic, right? And all they care about, they really just care about buying the list of patients, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is called purchasing market share. And corporations do it very well. They really specifically go after doctors over the age of 65 who are within 3 to 5 years of retiring, and they romance them. And this is what I see sort of across the board. And I do advise for VC companies that do that. But the problem is that creates a lot of depleted healthcare systems that kind of fuel itself on systems that do not work. And so from a business standpoint, this is the check mark on the box of larger corporations scooping the market share up, right? The problem is why doctors are so burnt out these days is that the innovation that's required to change the healthcare system, even though it's in a lot of doctors' brains, it's not coming out, right? It's just kind of staying in there, and the patients actually suffer, right? And so now the health and wellness community, that's a different story because a lot of times, you know what, I'm going to stop taking insurance. I don't have to adhere to the CMS guidelines and et cetera, right? And then they say, I'm going to engineer the health the way that I see fit. But then what happens is they get burnt out too because they're serving a population which they may not have a whole lot of passion serving, which is relatively middle to upper middle class and wealthy populations, right? And so engineering sort of the system that marries it together requires a very, very, very deep understanding of reimbursement strategies, revenue cycle, and business tactics that I got kind of obsessed over. And now that I've done it, and I just feel like crap. Why didn't doctors do this before? And that's the thing that I really want to kind of get out there is that we really have to take control.
That's awesome. So I know a lot of physicians on my audience there. It changed from financial economic empowerment to now them starting their company. So what are you're a seasoned entrepreneur. So tell us some of the challenges you encounter the way when you start a business, and we'll talk about scaling a little bit later.
Yes. So first of all, let's just kind of address the elephant in the room is that physicians aren't trained to build businesses, right? We're trained to be very textbook savvy. And then we're also trained to really develop relationships between us and our patients. But the concept of entrepreneurship and the things that are needed to get to a process where you're not building the company burnt out is the opposite of what we learned in residency. I'll tell you the truth, right? Let's think about it for a second. Let's just deconstruct residency for a second, right? And I talked to Brent Lacey about this before. If we deconstruct residency, what it was is multiple layers of structures that we had to adhere to, okay? If we don't adhere to the structures, we get spanked by somebody, either a lawsuit or administrator or something like that. And then we come out, right? And we come out and we're like, oh my gosh, I really crave more structure because I wasn't trained to create my own structures because that's not what residency was all about, nor was it the fellowship all about, And so what happens is that we tend to get our right brain stifled, our creative brain kind of stifled into this sort of fear phenomenon. And the fear is that if you do things outside the box, you quote unquote destroy your life. And financially, we're actually tied to the conventional structures because I came out with $300,000 in debt. I don't know about you, but that's a lot of money I have to pay back, right? Mm-hmm. So we need some sort of security. And then, not to mention, there's physicians listening to this that never match residency. They have to create their own structure as well, which is another whole other set. So we think about it from that point of view. There's a whole lot of PTSD going on through residency, especially for the right brain dominant creative type of physicians who are entrepreneurs, which probably majority of the people listening to this podcast, right? Mm-hmm. And so the concept of entrepreneurship is structures and innovation, right? So even though physicians are really good at creating the structures, and that could make them a very wise business strategist at structures, but especially startups require some innovation to go ahead. So for a lot of the physicians starting your companies out there, the first thing to undo is asking yourself how, right? And this seems so counterintuitive, but a lot of doctors say, "How am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? How am I going to do this?" And the question that you ask yourselves, "How am I?" It's not "How am I?" Right? It's who's going to do this? Who's going to do this? Who's going to do this? If you start with the who first, then it becomes a whole lot easier. Obsess about the who and don't obsess about the how. If you look at a serial entrepreneur like Elon Musk, for example, right? I don't agree with everything he says, but you got to admit the guy is kind of a genius. Is he starts with who first? I'm going to hire the best engineers, right? I'm going to hire the best rocket scientists for this project. And then when you develop Neuralink, I'm going to hire the best neuroscientist people. And you're like, well, Elon's a self-made billionaire. Like, how do you even do that? Well, he wasn't always that way, right? But the same philosophy that started Tesla, that started SpaceX and Neuralink, is the same philosophy he had since college, before he quit college, right? With him and his brother. When they created the first rendition of PayPal, right? And so it's all about who, not how. And I think that traditional medical education is not taught that way. It's about how, not who, right? It's about what can you do? How can you serve? And that creates a lot of burnout. So a lot of doctors kind of listening to this who maybe have exited their medical practice and kind of use their right brain to experience this. And I bet you a lot of you doctors who did your own startup had that burnout in the very beginning. It's the same type of burnout that you go through medical practice, is how am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? Right. Mm-hmm. And, that's my one piece of advice, is really to undo this learning about how am I going to blank. Now, as I know, who are you going to get on your team that can do X, Y, and Z? And that is the foundation and the principle of developing business to scale.
That's awesome. Yeah, who and teamwork.
Right.
Well, that's so the next question is, so you started your business and now scalability. So you talked about teams. Right. What other items can you employ or deploy to scale your business or your company?
Absolutely. So it doesn't matter what type of company you created. I've owned an auto boutique and marketing, and I've done all sorts of stuff you can think of, and I failed a lot. And that's really important to do, is get advice from people who failed, went bankrupt, had to do it over again, and suffered a lot. And trust me, I've suffered a lot through a lot of these processes. And so, the first, or I guess the first thing was who, not how. The second recommendation is to talk to the people who have completely failed, okay? And ask what their lessons are. And if you ask what their lessons are, they're going to say very similar things. And which brings me to my second tip is, 80% of business is psychology, right? And a lot of things that we do on a daily basis comes from a subconscious mind. And in fact, a lot of reasons why we chose to be doctors actually come from our 3 to 8 year old development of childhood psychology, is sort of that hero's mentality. And I recently posted on this on my social media and LinkedIn, is we are taught to provide value because we're heroes. In reality, that heroes don't scale a business. It's guides that really scale a business. So the difference between a hero and a guide is that if you watch every movie, all heroes suffer some sort of tragedy, right? Luke Skywalker got his arm cut off, right? or hand cut off. But Yoda, even though after he died, he was still the guide. He was pretty much chilling. And so if you see every movie, the guide is always there, because the guide is not fully tied to the outcome of the hero. And so we as doctors tend to kind of raise up, even in media, they put us as heroes, which I have a big issue with. The term frontline doctors. Frontline is reserved for military personnel, not doctors. Doctors should really be heroes. And same thing as entrepreneurs. And we should be seen as the actual guides, so that our clients or our patients can actually be their own heroes, right? And so to put ourselves in that guidance philosophy, then the things that we do from a psychological perspective for a business actually changes. And guides actually have more intimate relationships with other people. When I say intimate, I'm not talking about, more intimacy in that regards, but intimacy in terms of intimacy in professional relationships, and we tend to gather more raving fans to fuel the actual business. And that guide actually comes out and say that, hey, you know what? Us as a business, these are our services. And whether or not you come on board with these services, it may not be the right time for you, or it may be, but I'm not tied to your outcome. But therefore, I will construct my business around my core values, which is the third tip, my core values, so that I will not be burnt out, because everything that I do is associated with my wants, my own wants and needs, and not be tied to some sort of a hero's outcome or romanticizing. So this is, I suffered this a lot before in the past, especially with shiny object syndrome, which I think a lot of people can relate to. So
yeah.
So that's my next tip.
Yeah, I can totally relate. And so I know you had so many epiphanies, and I know a lot of the audience. I know you have a new venture launch, so feel free to tell the audience about that and how to get a hold of you and contact you. Right.
So I'm doing two things right now. The one is I'm scaling Texas Center for Lifestyle Medicine. If you guys are actually interested in practicing integrative health, I'm more than happy to have you on. And the second thing is, if you're one of those entrepreneurial physicians that want to kind of developed an integrative and collaborative health practice, everything that I learned from developing Texas Center for Lifestyle Medicine, all my brain is actually in a platform called Integrative Practice Builder. So if you go to integrativepracticebuilder.com, I developed multiple online courses and a masterclass and a playbook to let people know how to navigate this. And in fact, it's all CME as well. And I have my largest portion of that, believe it or not, is the psychology of business, which I feel like everyone should start with that to sort of flip that mindset, guide to hero mentality, and then also know how to work with different teams and expectations, setting outcomes, setting goals, financial outcomes, KPIs, key performance indices, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very holistic view of business, and it's a very holistic view of how to execute integrative health practices specifically for the insured population. There's a lot of online courses that do more like cash practices, which are really great for cash profits businesses that specifically target a specific market. I think those are great. It's not for me, but so if you're like me and actually want to serve an insurance population, it's a lot more complex. But there's strategies on how to do it, and learn from literally my $1 million worth of mistakes that I've made in the last 4 years.
Awesome. And I know you have a LinkedIn profile. You mentioned you're on Instagram. You have so I know the audience will, all the references will be linked in the show notes. But thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
It was a wonderful discussion, and we look forward to hearing more about your success.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on.
What a fantastic show. I hope you enjoyed our very special guest. Just remember, as a shout out to our this week's sponsor, CityVest.com. CityVest gives you access to the best real estate private equity funds with enhanced investment terms, verified due diligence, and lower risk. You can check them out at cityvest.com or click on the link in the show notes below to hear about their upcoming investment offerings. I'm excited that you made it for another episode. You are truly the best. If you've been following the show for a while, you know that my passion is to bring you the education you need to find your path to financial freedom. Please come back week after week for new content, new resources, and great guests. Until then, if you haven't already, please be sure to check out the website, www.drchrislewmdphd.com for more support. I'll see you next week.